Did you know that salt is mentioned over 40 times in the Bible? From covenants to purification, from blessings to curses, salt plays a crucial role in spiritual symbolism. But could salt be more than just a seasoning? Let's explore the deep spiritual significance of salt in the Bible. In ancient times, salt was not only a preservative but a symbol of purity and divine covenant. The Israelites were surrounded by nations steeped in idolatry and sin, constantly challenging their faith and purity. Could something as simple as salt protect them from such spiritual corruption? Leviticus chapter 2 verse 13. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. In Leviticus, God commands that all offerings be seasoned with salt, representing an eternal covenant between God and his people. This command signifies that the covenant is pure, enduring, and unbreakable. 2 Chronicles chapter 13 verse 5. Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever, by a covenant of salt? The covenant of salt is used here to emphasize the everlasting nature of God's promise to David's lineage. Just as salt preserves, God's promise to David is eternal. Genesis chapter 19 verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. This verse highlights salt as a symbol of judgment and consequence. Lot's wife disobeyed God's command not to look back at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and she was turned into a pillar of salt, signifying the seriousness of disobedience. Mark chapter 9 verse 50. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. Jesus speaks of salt as a symbol of peace and purity. The call to have salt among yourselves is a call to maintain righteousness and integrity in our relationships, reflecting God's enduring covenant. Numbers chapter 18 verse 19. Whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters as your perpetual share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord, for both you and your offspring. This verse underscores the idea of salt as a symbol of an everlasting covenant, this time between God and the priests. The covenant of salt ensures that the priests and their descendants are continually provided for by God. Joy, the blessing of spiritual salt. Matthew chapter 5 verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Jesus calls his followers the salt of the earth, indicating that they are to preserve and purify the world through their faith. However, the warning that salt can lose its flavor reminds us to stay true to our spiritual calling. Colossians chapter 4 verse 6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. This verse encourages believers to ensure their speech is both gracious and impactful. Much like how salt enhances the flavor of food, it signifies the importance of wisdom and discernment in communication. Overcoming obstacles. Salt in the face of trials. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 4. On the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in cloths. In ancient times, newborns were rubbed with salt to purify and strengthen them. This imagery in Ezekiel represents the beginning of spiritual life, emphasizing the necessity of purification through God's covenant. Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 23. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulfur. Nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in fierce anger. This verse presents salt as a curse, depicting the complete desolation of the land as a result of God's judgment. The barrenness caused by salt signifies irreversible destruction as a consequence of sin. Miracles. The power of salt in the Bible. 2 Kings chapter 2 verse 21. Then he went out to the spring and threw the salt into it, saying, "This is what the Lord says, I have healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive." The prophet Elisha used salt to purify a polluted spring, turning it from a source of death into a source of life. This miracle demonstrates the power of salt as an agent of divine healing and restoration. Faith in difficult times, clinging to the covenant. Ezra chapter 6, verse 9. Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail. This provision signifies God's continuous care and the importance of maintaining rituals that honor God, even in times of difficulty. Job chapter 6, verse 6. Is tasteless food eaten without salt, or is there flavor in the sap of the mallow? Job's rhetorical question reflects the necessity of salt in making food palatable, symbolizing how God's covenant adds meaning and purpose to life, even in suffering. The curse when salt brings judgment. Judges chapter 9, verse 45. All that day, Abimelech pressed his attack against the city until he had captured it and killed its people. Then he destroyed the city and scattered salt over it. Abimelech's act of scattering salt over the city signifies a curse, ensuring that the city would remain desolate and uninhabitable. Salt, in this context, represents judgment and the irreversible consequences of rebellion against God. Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 9. Therefore, as surely as I live, declares the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, surely Moab will become like Sodom, the Ammonites like Gomorrah, a place of weeds and salt pits, a wasteland forever. The remnant of my people will plunder them. The survivors of my nation will inherit their land. Here, salt is again associated with desolation, signifying God's judgment on nations that oppose his people. The reference to salt pits underscores the complete and enduring nature of this curse. The comprehensive role of salt. The Bible teaches us that salt is more than just a seasoning. It's a powerful symbol of God's covenant, a tool for purification, and a representation of both blessings and curses. We are called to be the salt of the earth, preserving faith, hope, and love, while also recognizing the potential for judgment when we stray from God's path. The spiritual weapon of salt. So, is salt a spiritual weapon? Absolutely. It's a reminder of God's covenant, a source of spiritual endurance, a symbol of divine healing, and a warning of judgment. Let us embrace the power of salt in our spiritual lives, using it to preserve our faith, purify our hearts, and guide our actions as we share the flavor of God's grace with the world.